Good morning, Freddie. Thank you very much for joining me this morning on the Greener Tech podcast. Great to have you on.
Hi, Charles. Good to be here.
So, for those that don't know, Freddie is a serial entrepreneur, has founded multiple companies in the past, and is currently CEO and founder of EMSOL, which is a UK company with a focus in clean tech for essentially identifying and reducing air and noise pollution within multiple environments. We will lead on to that towards the end of the podcast, but thought it'd be great to get Freddie involved at the moment because I'm talking to young founders, entrepreneurs, smart people every day that want to start their own project or company and don't necessarily know where to start. So thought it'd be good to get a veteran of the game involved and expand a little bit on the highs and lows and the struggles of getting into a new business or a new venture. So Freddie, do you mind starting me off in where it all began?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, so entrepreneurship, where it all began. I didn't start my first company until I was about 33. I know a lot of kids now coming out of university going straight into entrepreneurship, and I do mentor a lot of people coming out of university and sort of giving them a bit of guidance on that. But I think in my days, it wasn't really frowned. It was frowned upon to doing that. It was always about getting a corporate job, and but I always found this itch even when I was in corporate world, and I worked for BT. My background is engineering, and I worked in America and I worked in Israel in telecoms. I always had this itch around, I sort of need to be, I see a problem, I see an opportunity, and I just really struggled with that, working for someone else, so I set up my first company on the back end of my experience with telecommunications, and it was a sort of telco business, predominantly providing a service around what I knew. And I think what I find with entrepreneurs that I meet, even coming out of universities and all sorts of places, is typically they are endemically entrepreneurial around the opportunities that they see in their world. And so, there's loads of kids coming out of university with particular applications around recruitment and managing housing and managing stuff that they see. But to me, that's such a great trigger. And for me, I was in telcos. And I just saw the opportunity to build a tech company within the telco, and I did that. And it really just grew from there. And I remember that business in those days, telecoms was like really, really growing quite a bit. And we, within the first sort of year, had £1 million of cash in the bank. And I was going, oh my God, this is just easy. This is like, but then I realized after selling stuff is easy, but delivering it, continuing it is really hard. And so even though we had £1 million of cash through customer orders, got some investment, it was like, it was just amazing. But then I had to recruit loads of people. And then I realized, oh my God, sustaining that growth and making sure the product's good and the team's good was so difficult. And I found that really, really hard. And so we had to sort of go from, really amazing peak to like the realities of like what it takes to really grow a good business.
Yeah, the people management aspects. And I imagine, technology now would have been so much different to when you first started as well. And, definitely an exciting time in that huge growth phase. Was the concept still the same of starting a tech-based company then as you'd say now?
No, I think there's a lot more help now. I think there's a lot more pitch management. There is a lot more accelerators in those days. And I think what's a bit worrying for me at times is, and I talk about this, is when I speak to entrepreneurs, is how do I fund my business? And in my days, I always funded my business by getting a customer order, and then you go, oh shit, now you have the order. Now you got to figure out how to deliver it. Whereas a lot of the work now is about putting together a good pitch deck and a good market analysis and build some IP and stuff. And so obviously getting a customer order does steer you down the path to a certain extent. And so there is this theory that if you raise some money and build some IP and do some development and then take that to market. So, it depends what you do, but I've always been a big fan of like selling to a customer first and then, leveraging that. So, but today, there is a lot more technology available. So in my days, you know, we talk about Stripe and payment gateways and Google mapping. All that stuff didn't exist. I had to build all of those interfaces, and so for me, it was, we were technically capable of doing that, but it just slowed us down, because we had to build all the ingredients. And so I think what's exciting now for the younger generation is access to technology is really quick. You can buy APIs into things rapidly. And so what's really crucial now is not so much the technology, but the business model.
Yeah.
What does a customer want? How do you add value, and how does that work? And certainly in today's world, design is everything. It's got to be beautiful. It's got to be really engaging. It's got to be everything. And so, whereas, you know, prior to me, it was about, you know, it's the functional stuff. People didn't really, you know, as long as it did what it did, it was sort of fine, very engineering sort of based. But now, in my view, a lot of the entrepreneurs I meet are sort of very WYSIWYG, and they can put together some really beautiful stuff. And it is all about, you know, user interface stuff, I think.
Yeah, yeah, nice. And with that, then, when you first started the first company, was that inspired by either what you'd studied or what you'd learned from other companies, and transpired into that sort of initiative to start something on your own?
Yeah, I think I don't think I studied it, but I think intrinsically as an entrepreneur, you're constantly absorbing stuff around, and for me, it was really, I think it's just seeing with what I know, uh, in terms of the market, customers, and my background knowledge, and then seeing how and where the opportunity is. And in those days, the opportunity was, there's a lot of people selling equipment to telco companies, but that no one was really providing the managed service. No one was providing the excellence of what this stuff does, and managing that. And so to me, it was a bit like, you know, selling bits of kit is great, but to me, there was a real opportunity, and not people wanting the kit, but they also wanting the service. They wanted to add the value added service. So that was my first entry into like a managed service offering. And most of my companies now, the scale up companies, are much more into this SaaS based service modeling offer, where you provide the service and we provide all the capabilities. And I think one thing I've been very good at is selling a story to a customer, and pulling through. So not only just selling something, but actually driving the value from what we sell. And that, you know, is you know, one of my customers said that, I never thought you could walk the talk, but you do walk the talk. And I think for entrepreneurs, passionate founders, is about walking the talk, and, you know, and just delivering what you promise. And that's great.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's great foundations, really, isn't it? To put in early, to know that you're working towards providing it, and not just, like you mentioned there, you're walking the talk. But a lot of people just talk the talk, and sometimes ultimately can't follow through. They've got the ambition to scale and grow as a fast land and expand company, but often maybe the background and the structure is something which is lacking a little bit. And
Yeah.
with when you first started, you mentioned things took off fast, the money suddenly appearing in the bank, customers coming in and needing that requirement, and having to scale up the company pretty quick to get the right people in at the right time. Was that a struggle? Was it finding the right people? Because I know from my perspective, recruitment's a lot different now than it was then, and the tooling, etc., of what you had access to is probably nowhere near.
Yeah, I think at the moment I've made loads of mistakes on recruitment, and I think you sort of recruit with, you know, typically experienced talent who, you know, that you just have a job. You know, you sort of have people that you know, and you recruit people that you know. And I think there's a tendency for founders to recruit people that they know,
Yeah.
as opposed to recruiting for a particular task and doing the correct recruitment process. So, you know, the first company that I set up, you know, I think we recruited up to 30 people within the first sort of, you know, 6 months or so. It was rapidly, but it was a disaster. You know, we was like recruiting people that we sort of knew, and, you know, and you just, you know, and you recruit people thinking they just do their job, but the reality is, you know, they didn't do the job so well, and then they didn't really sort of work. So it's a nightmare. And I think one of my reflections, I guess, over the course of time, is I do the people side is the most crucial piece for an entrepreneur, because I can still do my thing, still be entrepreneurial, but I can't run all the elements of the company. Otherwise, you run yourself ragged. And so, so today now I have an HR person who works for me part time,
Nice.
and that was almost my first recruit, my first partner, to help me with her understanding me and understanding, because I'll have to say, I want someone to do this, and they can push back and go, you don't need that, or you need this, and writing a job description, figuring out what is the job we need doing, and then finding the most suitable candidate across the country that could sort of do that, as opposed to, oh, I know this bloke who's really good at that, and then you sort of try to create the job around the person.
Yeah.
So there's a tendency to do that, and because you're so impatient and don't have the recruitment skills. But I think what I found now is really define what you want, and build around that. And the other mistake I've made is recruiting more junior people, and the challenge for an entrepreneur who's going 100 miles an hour is that junior person needs managing and coaching and support, and sometimes it's very difficult to give them that knowledge and support that they need to be successful. And so now it's about recruiting people around me who are the right level, who can take on an element of the business. And so it's really about recruiting my direct reports, as opposed to someone necessarily doing a particular task and then building the company that way. But that's just like, the tendency is a lot of companies don't have a lot of money, and so you do recruit on a very tight budget. But it's the recruitment piece is fraught with challenges. But if you get it right, it is the gold. It is the key thing for us.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned to me before was that passion for entrepreneurship and starting up new companies is something that never really fades or dies. And how has that transpired with yourself? Have you always juggled more than one, or have you always sort of took one company to the end of where you see it and moved on to the next challenge?
Yeah, it's funny because when I sold my last company, Pi Mapping to DPD, it's like and that was an exhausting process. And when you're sort of free from that, you do sort of dabble in lots of things. And so I did dabble in a fair amount of things. So I set up this entrepreneur club called Smiling Barracuda. I had the Disability Blue Badge Protector business. I had my Pi Mapping business, and I set up EMSOL as my Cleantech business. And so it was like, and I was mentoring loads of people as well. So just doing loads. But the reality is, as there's certain companies, and I think as soon as I take investor money for one, then you've got to commit your time to that. So for me, dabbling in lots of these companies and helping stuff is great, as long as you have full ownership and you're not really using other people's investment. But as soon as EMSOL started to get interesting and serious and super exciting in terms of where that could go, and as soon as you take investor money, then you sort of 90% of your time has to go into that, because as an entrepreneur, when we take money from other investors, we don't control the destiny. We have an obligation now. And I think there's an issue with a lot of investors, a lot of founders that I talking about raising money to pay for their sort of business or their idea, or pay for them. But the reality is, we as entrepreneurs, as soon as we get angel investment or early stage investment, we owe them that return. We have to dedicate and commit. So I think my mindset, I've messed up and I've lost so much money for angels in the past, and and I've really been on a difficult journey where you've taken money from friends and hasn't worked out, and it's just such an awkward position. And I think my mindset now is really clear.
Yeah.
Is you take other people's money once you've de-risked the company as much as you possibly can, and that money is for sort of growth money. And I think I know you wanted me to expand a little bit about funding for early stage companies, but the pecking order of entrepreneur growth is through customers. If you can get a customer to give you an order, a commitment, then that is your first priority. Can you sell something to someone, present something, get them to buy into it? And I think today, lots of companies are so happy with entrepreneurship and innovation, and they're happy to go down that road. You don't have to be a huge company with huge finance department or whatever to manage big companies. And so so definitely customers as key. And then secondly, I would raise a personal loan. So personal loans, so that means, and there's a thing called startup funding loans, which are government backed, and so there's elements of security. But I think that due diligence, that you'd write a loan application for you to borrow money from an institute, and that is a really, really good discipline, because it teaches you about cash flow, balance sheet, and if you don't qualify, then you can figure out why you don't qualify, and it just helps you finesse what you're doing. And so getting a personal loan, I think, is important, because that shows willing, and just going through that mechanism, that process is quite important. And then once you've got your personal loan sorted out and you've figured out what you're going to use that money for, which has to be for people or IP generation, and then you go and spend effort and time on grants, because a grant is there for you to accelerate your business and to leverage and take risk. So a grant is there to de-risk it for investors. So the whole reason the grants exist is because they want entrepreneurs to sort of have a bit of comfort to go and evidence and do something. But grants have a place in the early stage of life, and they shouldn't be forever and ever. And so grants are quite important. And then after that, once you've done some feasibility studies, got them part funded or grant funded, then you can start to use what I would call your SEIS investment.
Yeah, nice.
And SEIS, as you may know, is using private investors' money, but they get 50% of that money back. And so there's an allowance of £150,000. So I would make sure you give that allowance to the right type of investors to help you at that stage.
Yeah, really good one as well then, for some security on their side as well, isn't it? So
de-risks it. It's all about de-risking it for the investor.
Yeah, it makes yourself a bit more attractive as well as a company then to gain more investment, etc. Put yourself on that pedestal and hopefully move towards that. I think I've personally seen companies sometimes which overscale and they overgrow and they don't have the pipeline or the customers. And I know sometimes it might be a case of the customers will come and the money will come, etc. But personally, I've seen companies which look great product, but have overstretched, over resourced, too many staff, too many consultants within it, and ultimately spread things too thin, and it's sort of fallen down to that end hurdle. And with yourself, with Pi Mapping, was that, you mentioned, sort of touched on briefly, you sold it to DPD. Was that your first exposure to an acquisition process?
Yeah, well, as you know, I sold my telco business to BT.
Okay.
That was on the back of so we sold that one to BT, which was great. But yeah, the DPD one was good, and that was an acquisition that was difficult, because I could be in the office. It happened incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was. I guess I've had 2 acquisitions at this stage, and really I think the challenge for me now is, how do I build a good business, and how do I exit that, and how do I sort of just harmony across the board? How do we sort of make it a win-win for everyone? And this is a part of our challenge as entrepreneurs is how do you get the exit for your shareholders, and how do you get that return on investment for yourself? Because typically as entrepreneurs we underpay ourselves. But yeah, you still got to feed, you still got to eat, you still got to sort of build your family wealth, and you got to sort of juggle that, as well as juggling like an exit as well.
Yeah. So there's like a number of factors, personal and business, that you need to factor in a bit of a blend, really, isn't it? So yeah, with that, did you hold on sort of with the acquisition to help with changeover, and even look to, I suppose, expand that side of the business within DPD?
No, I think the thing I've learned out of all of this, and certainly for someone like DPD or any company acquiring an entrepreneur-led business is the entrepreneur super disruptive. It depends what type of skill set you have, but the founders want to be at the equation straight away.
Yeah.
You know, like I think most of my companies, when we did the acquisition, all the team had jobs going forward in the new entity, but the founder moves on.
Yeah.
And you sort of always there in the background to support. But on the whole, I found even when I've stayed in companies and helped them, it's been really difficult because because someone else is calling the shots and you're sort of behaving as an employee. And one thing I've learned as an entrepreneur is there's pain being an entrepreneur, but there's also pain working for a corporate, working as an employee.
Yeah.
And they don't mix really. And then I think an entrepreneur is a difficult to be an employee, and sometimes some employees just don't want to be an entrepreneur. So I think for me, I would always exit totally out of my companies and give them the keys, give them all the stuff that they need, and get to make sure your team are all like lined up and doing a good job. Because I think what they want a bit of continuity. So having the team there is key. But we as entrepreneurs, we can't be the foundation of the business. We're just a creator. We can't be the crucial link to holding it together. And that's the key. You know, and I do it in all my companies. I try to make myself redundant, so the company can function without me.
Yeah, it takes that sort of piece out of the equation, then, doesn't it? Because, like you said, it's a case of square peg round hole, isn't it? When they want you to conform to what they're doing, but you've got this vision as well in which you had for the company, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in, and ultimately still want to live that sort of loss of what you put into it. And after the acquisition of Pi Mapping, then you mentioned to myself before that you touched on a couple of companies, but and a couple of new ideas, etc. But I suppose on your side, EMSOL's been, for the last 4.5 years, really that main piece of your time, which is absorbing most of your efforts, and ultimately what got myself very much interested in the work you were doing, because it was, am I right in thinking, your first real stab at Cleantech?
Yes, well, Cleantech, it is a definite first stab, and boy, is Cleantech hard.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds the obvious thing to do, but the return on investment is tricky, and getting the business model right. So everyone wants it, but no one wants to pay for it, and it's sort of a difficult model, but it is super exciting. It really, you know, it's very purpose led. You know, we're sort of moving down a piece where, you know, you can do good, and you're building a business that can just grow and really drive phenomenal change for the better, which is just super exciting.
Yeah, nice. For yourself, what was it that maybe inspired you to go down that route? Because I know some of your background leans to the telematics mapping side of things, and ultimately, I'm sure you can expand on the sort of link between the two, with that and what you're doing at EMSOL. But what was it maybe that pushed you into that clean tech vertical?
Yeah, like I never really thought of it as a sort of clean tech vertical. You know, at the time, it was about pollution. It was about transport pollution. And sometimes when you drive behind a vehicle, you see the stuff coming out of it, and then you're sitting in a cafe and you see, you know, like this truck, you know, sitting there with its engine idling, and it's just disgusting. And then you know, then you see, you know, like mums and dads dropping kids off at school, and they're going, actually, you know, like they're just leaving their engine idling, and as sort of, you know, engineering type person and sort of the background in transport and smart cities, you go, you know, it just dawns on me how to solve the problem. You know, it's just one of these things. I just knew how to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so obviously experiencing the problem of, you know, bad air, and we live in the city,
Yeah.
and there's always this talk a lot about, you know, there's a lot more growth in cities. And I go, you know, can you imagine clean air in the city? The making life in the city and having clean air would be just amazing. And so for me, it was one of these itches that had to keep getting scratched, and I kept scratching it, and I just kept digging around. And then and I think as entrepreneurs, you just keep navigating, understanding more, studying more, understanding more about what's going on, and you start figuring out the path, and then it ends up being one of these constant sleepless nights where it's just on your head all the time, and you just can see the vision, you can see the path, and you just can't put it down, so that's the energy that you build from, oh my God, I can see it. And I think it's hard for entrepreneurs to communicate it. And so we have to go through a fair amount of period of time in isolation as we finesse our ideas, as we finesse our sort of concept of what we're doing before we can sort of get it to anything that's sort of tangible. But yeah, so for me, EMSOL and understanding how I could solve the emission challenge in London or in any city globally was really, really clear. And I guess you could label it as clean tech, but I didn't necessarily go, I want to be in clean tech. I just as an entrepreneur, you realize you just want to solve problems.
Yeah, and it's just, I suppose, by chance this problem then is somewhat labeled as that, either green or clean tech, but essentially it's a real smart bit of kit. And do you mind telling me and telling some of our listeners a little bit more about, I suppose, a little maybe brief explanation on the tech behind it, because you mentioned the problem and what you've seen, and you're working towards this pathway to solve it, but what was the solution for yourself?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. I investigated at the time IoT, Internet of Things, and I investigated quite a lot of stuff about sensors. I investigated a lot about data, and I investigated a lot about telematics. And my background was in telematics and fleet management and freight. And like I said, you sort of piece all those bits together. So what we do is we do procure loads of air quality and noise sensors, and the costs of those sensors are getting more effective and cheaper to deploy. And we also have a tracking technology using Bluetooth tracking. So we have a small Bluetooth tag that fits onto individual vehicles and stuff. So what we do is we monitor a location, whether it's a construction site or whether it's a building or a factory or any transport depot. And we basically track the individual objects that are moving around. It could be vehicles, it could be machinery, it could be anything. And we know the position of those individual assets to fairly close accuracy, to 25 centimeter positional accuracy. So all these objects are moving around. But what we do is we scatter the site with air quality monitoring and IoT sensors, and we attribute the pollution for every single movement. And so when a vehicle comes up to a delivery of of lunch or even water or concrete, we know when that delivery activity happens, vehicle turns up, engine switches off, delivery activity happens, engine switches on and moves away. And with our air quality sensors and noise sensors, we can completely measure the full impact of that delivery activity. So we know how that driver, how that vehicle, what it's done, how it's behaved, and the total impact for it. And so if we are breaching air quality thresholds, or the engine is leaking, or the engine's overloaded, or the engine is left idling, we can determine that, and we can determine that in real time. And so part of my mission is to make sure the drivers of the drivers of those vehicles, or the fleet owners, can get visibility in real time of what their drivers are doing at that location, and fix the problem before it becomes a big problem.
Yeah, and am I right in thinking then there's somewhat regulations on the air quality levels, so what machinery can and can't put out?
Yeah.
Wise, but although they say it's regulated, is there any tech involved in that, or essentially is the work EMSOL is bringing in that level of regulation and I suppose adherence as well needed?
I think to bear in mind is as an entrepreneur, we are typically ahead of the market, and so there definitely is existing regulations in place. But I think for any entrepreneur business, what you got to do, you got to go hunting companies who give a damn. Yeah. You got to go find people who, there may be a regulation framework, but most of those are like just the bare minimum people sort of do. Yeah. And really for enterprise innovation thing, you don't want to be selling on here's a regulation, here's a solution, because it's sort of quite late in the market.
Yeah.
So you go, well, we know the regulation exists, and we know the regulation will mostly get bigger and more restrictive. So really for us as entrepreneurs, it's about being in their market earlier and working with the companies who sort of get it.
Yeah.
And I think that my message to a lot of entrepreneurs is don't necessarily worry about selling it to everyone, but only sell to the best customers who do give a damn, or who could actually engage with you, who sort of get your vision. Because that way there's a win-win. They're motivated to work with you, and you're finessing what you're doing, and as the regulations catch up. So I would, definitely, I think the regulations will catch up with what we do, and we'll be way ahead of the market as we are at the moment.
Yeah, no, exactly that, ahead of the curve. And with that then, so you mentioned you want to work, I suppose, with companies rather than against them. So you're using this tech for a better purpose, so they can work with you to know and understand their sort of purpose and their positioning as well, within having some sort of social awareness around what they're emitting. But is there any other markets and industries you could easily see this tech fitting in well in? And I suppose any use cases on your side on which you're already doing?
Yeah, we've got some pretty nice use cases. We have one awesome supermarket chain where we're monitoring the pollution at their depot at one of their stores in Finchley.
Okay.
And they are sort of collaborative partners with us, and they want to measure the air pollution and the noise pollution caused by their delivery activity, because they want to do more nighttime deliveries and drive operational efficiency and try and do things out of hours. And so they're a retail customer. They own their own fleet, but they also contract other fleet to come to site. So that's a strong use case. We have another use case at a consolidation centre. There's a disused car park in the Isle of Dogs, and they have these dark kitchens in there. So you got kitchens that cook for Uber Eats and Just Eat and those guys. And there's got a hydrophonic center there. It's got lots of activities going on in this hub. And so we measure the environmental impact of all those movements, all that activity, so we can control. So if someone's misbehaving or causing a problem, we can identify and target those mitigations before it becomes a problem. And I think the issue that we have in urban areas is we live in a community where the community live there and they're worried about air pollution, they're worried about noise. And so to do some business and some activity, you can't upset the balance too much. And so monitoring and measuring different impacts caused by business activity to make sure it aligns with how the community values are is going to be stuff that's going to be quite crucial for us. And so measurement is a big part of what we do now. And then using that measurement to deliver and derive actions using real time. So the use of technology in real-time technology is really the key now, because everyone wants data now. And I think if we can innovate around driving mitigations before it becomes a problem, then how awesome. Community lives in harmony, business cracks on, doesn't cause a pollution, doesn't take anything from the environment.
Yeah.
It's sort of utopic, right?
Yeah. Data-driven utopia. And with that, I know it's been really exciting times at EMSOL at the moment, gaining some really good traction. You mentioned some of the use cases there are massive, aren't they? And big companies are starting to adopt this tech, which can only really lead to other companies moving in the same direction as more of a social acceptance moving forwards. But with things at the moment expanding so fast, what's happening on your side as an entrepreneur? Are you at the moment, is it a case of taking on investment? Is it a case of growing?
I think one of the things is quite important for entrepreneurs is to make sure you dominate, scale and dominate. And I've got scars, with not doing that quickly enough. And I think what I've realized, obviously you got to de-risk the business from the investor's point of view, but there's a phase that you need to get to the next phase. And so our next phase is evidencing what we have, value proposition, and the ability to scale up. And I think for all businesses, scaling up and having the right team and including the right type of investment for that phase of growth is a crucial piece. So like I said before, entrepreneurs aren't naturally the best CEOs, but you've got to be a good enough CEO for now to get the sort of investment and the team to back you, because as you get to a certain scale, it's not about, you can't do it all. All you're driving is a vision, and making sure you're recruiting the right talent to help you sort of grow that phase. Because all the investors care about now is they love your vision, but they've got to make sure you can execute. And that execution comes into recruiting talent. People can only join you if you've got enough cash in your balance sheet, if you've got enough sort of runway. And the key for businesses is recruit brilliant people. But to do that, you do need investment, because most growth companies aren't necessarily making a profit. So what you're doing is you're just going out there to keep innovating and developing, and just working with your individual opportunities and clients, making sure you got a good win-win relationship there, and then it just starts to grow. And and obviously you'll be generating profits in time, just the sheer volume of the work you're doing. But yeah, for me, scaling is what I do now, and that all ends up being team, fundraise, the right type of investors for the next phase, and just keep being really, really punchy with how we want to grow the business. And because I think the UK is challenging, right? We've got great people, great talent, but we don't build great scalable companies. And so I'm really keen to go, how do we sort of really scale? And unfortunately, the funding community is difficult and slow, and is not as forward thinking as maybe say in America or Israel. But I think we've got to sort of figure out, we've got to just keep driving that, and understand that's the challenge, and we've just got to keep going. So luckily for me now is I can focus a lot on the fundraising side, because I've got a good team that's managing the process and the operational side of the business, which is great.
Nice. Yeah, some really good tips and tricks there, isn't it, for anyone listening really who's in the same position. Maybe it's there's tons of AI companies that are coming to the market every day with new ideas and a new product, but essentially picking up on some of the factors there is, if you're going to do it, make sure the company's scalable, but by doing that you need the right people at the right time, sometimes at an excess cost, but finding the right people then allows yourself as the entrepreneur and the founder to carry on with that vision and carry on with that scaling aspect of it, knowing that some of the day-to-day processes are going to be taken care of, and you don't need to look over your shoulder at every turn to see what's happening with the company.
But it's also worth mentioning, Charles, is letting people go as well. And that's the one thing that I think we struggled with before in my previous companies, is you have a certain phase of growth in the business, and you need the right talent for that. And you need to look at your next phase of growth and go, is the talent I currently have in the right situation for that growth? And invariably, you got to make a tough decision to go, actually, that if you continue recruiting and having that person on board at the next phase of growth and they're not really driving value, you're wasting their time and you're wasting your time. And so I do let a lot of people go and go, look, you are best served somewhere else, because it gets to a point where I can serve you to a certain point, but you've maxed out, and then you need to move on. And it's nothing to do with them being a bad employee, but they're just not right for the next phase of growth. And all they'll get what I call the bloody nose syndrome. They get the stress caused by trying to perform and trying to sort of do things. And so for me now, it's about harmony across the team to go, and managing people's recruitment and their careers, and transitioning them off to other companies and other places based on their sort of phase. So for me, it's all phases, and getting the right team for a phase of your acceleration, rewarding them, looking after them, and then getting a new elements of people through the next phase.
Yeah, and it's a good point. Some people extremely versatile and can probably transition with that, but like you said there, and I think something that a lot of people maybe overlook is like you said, business is different phases within the cycle, and sometimes people won't make that transition as well as what you need to do to maximize what you need from that position and ultimately from them as an individual. So it's a double negative, because they're not enjoying what they initially involved for, and you're not getting what you need out of that person in that position. So yeah, brilliant point there. And Freddie, thank you again for getting involved today, and been great hearing what you've been doing the last 2 decades. Pleasure. And equally what you've been doing and making a huge impact within clean tech at the moment.
Thanks a lot, Charles. Yeah, and it's really good to sort of talk it through. Thank you.